Okay, welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to have you with us again, and a pleasure to have my guest who's on that side of the screen. I'm losing myself here. Hilary Grosskopf joining us from the US today. Hilary is a Biggerplate partner, an author, a trainer, a coach, all sorts of things that you're going to teach us a little bit more about in this discussion. So Hilary, thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to pepper you with questions today about the sort of past, the present, the future. But the key information that I think we need to kind of give people right up front is if they want to go find out more about what you're doing, they need to go to awakeleadershipsolutions.com. And you've got a role mapping, a digital role mapping workshop coming up via Zoom on 31st of August. So there's some stuff to go jump in right away. But yeah, first of all, Hilary, thank you for joining me and welcome. How's life in the US right now for you?
Yeah. Hi, Liam. Thanks so much for having me on today. I'm glad to be here again talking with you. Yeah, life in the US is good. I think things are coming out of the COVID stages, which is really nice to see people back out, in the world again with each other. So that's
Getting
good.
a little bit back in the direction.
Yeah,
Love it.
exactly. Yeah.
So Hilary, let's dive straight into things. I discovered you, and I think we sort of discovered each other a couple of years ago because of your books. I think Awake Leadership, I think, was the first book I became aware of.
Yeah.
There you go. You got the pile ready there. So you've authored 3 books. I think a couple of versions of 3. We've got Awake Leadership, Awake Ethics, and Awake Apprenticeship. So maybe as an opening, you could just give us a little bit of a summary of all sort of what each one of those is focused on, and maybe we can then just go a little bit back in time and figure out how you arrived at those topics and what you do generally.
Yeah, of course. So my first book, Awake Leadership, I first published in 2017 and then published the current edition, the second edition in 2018. And Awake Leadership is really a get started guide for young professionals who are interested in leading a team or new leaders of teams. Why I wrote Awake Leadership, my first book, was because when I worked in the corporate world of retail and supply chain and logistics, transportation, I started leading a team of 3 people. And I found that there was really no tangible leadership advice on skills of how to go into the office and lead a team. I had found that there's a lot of great leadership books with philosophy and theory and awesome quotes and stories, but I was really looking for tangible ways to start leading my team. And mind mapping was an important part of that. So there's a lot of mind mapping exercises in Awake Leadership for helping you lead your team better. But really, that's why I wrote the book. And there's 7 vitals or chapters with exercises to start leading your team. So that's my first book. My second book, Awake Ethics, similarly is a guidebook, also with exercises. But Awake Ethics is a little bit more of a self-study book for how to reset or improve your mindset toward work and your relationships as well at work and in life. So there's 10 ethical principles in the book. Some are ethics to practice toward other people, like non-stealing of opportunities and acknowledgement, control of energy, of emotions, things like that. And others are ethical principles towards yourself, like self-study. And it's very based in yoga philosophy because, as you mentioned, I'm also a yoga teacher. So it's inspired by yoga philosophy and how to be more mindful at work. But I also incorporate mind mapping, of course, in Awake Ethics and some of the exercises. And then finally, Awake Apprentice, the third book, my newest book, which came out last year, is a book all about career development. How do I find the right career? How do I lead with my interests when choosing a career path or choosing my first job or pivoting in my career and choosing a new job? And then how do I really grow or achieve my potential in this job and in my career? So it's also a guidebook with exercises as well, but all about focused on career growth and career development.
Perfect. I mean, you've clearly had to give a summary of those 3 books before. That's really useful, Hilary, for anyone who hasn't got the books. We've got them out. You might even be able to see some of them actually in the background. Your books just in the bookshelf there. I think signed by you as well. So I think I want to come back to kind of the books, obviously, at some point, because I think there's a lot of interesting things in it. I think your prompt around the Awake Leadership book is particularly interesting because I can absolutely resonate with that idea that a lot of people sort of find themselves in roles where leadership skills are sort of assumed but never taught. So you find people entering sort of a certain level of their career management roles where they know maybe how to manage, but that's not always the same thing as leading. So I think that practical advice is really interesting. So I'm kind of interested to come back to that. But you mentioned that what kind of led you there was your experience and your career in a number of fields where you felt that practical guidance didn't exist. So could you maybe just go a little bit back in time? And so what is the sort of the Hilary career background that sort of led you then towards this, I think I'm going to be an author, or had authoring sort of always been there? Like, where did you start on this road, and how did you kind of get to where you are there?
Yeah, of course. So what's interesting to some people, to go back to the start, which is, like I said, interesting to a lot of people, is that I am an engineer by education. My undergrad and master's from college is actually in engineering. I went to college in Philadelphia for systems engineering. And systems, as you can maybe assume, relates to mind mapping, relates to yoga, but I was studying in terms of engineering, like computer science, how do airplanes work, things like that. And so I actually focused in supply chain systems. So when I graduated from school, I started working in retail because I loved shopping, retail, design. I started working for Urban Outfitters in Philadelphia and Anthropologie, that overall company, and transportation. And I learned a lot about supply chain, logistics, retail. I love working there. And as a team member, I started picking up on, how my leaders were leading teams in different ways, and how leaders in other departments led their teams. But it wasn't really until 5 years later, when I switched and moved to California and started working for Restoration Hardware, another furniture retail company, that I was leading a team of 3 people. I had led interns and had a 1-person team at Urban, small leadership roles. But when I started leading had more responsibility and led 3 people at first at Restoration Hardware, I really started keying into how should I lead my team in the right way. I was having to hire people, and leadership really became the focus, whereas work was the focus before, when I was an individual contributor and sort of managing up to my manager. When I became a leader, leadership actually became much more interesting to me than the work itself, right? And I realized that for a lot of leaders who manage people and manage teams or manage projects, whatever type of leader you are, the leadership and the collaboration skills can actually be a lot more difficult than the work itself at a certain point in your career, right? So I realized that a lot of people didn't have those skills and didn't have a place to learn those skills. So I started developing exercises for myself as a leader, and also to do with my team, to improve our teamwork and to improve my leadership. And at the same time, again, going back in college, while studying engineering, I was very stressed out, as other engineers might know. It's a lot to take on engineering school. So I was lucky to find yoga in Philadelphia. And I started practicing yoga at the same time, which was sort of my little oasis on the weekends, or 1 or 2 days a week, where I could exercise and breathe and be outside of the university bubble. So I became very interested in yoga. And at the end of college or university, I did my first yoga training and became a yoga teacher. And then in California, I did my 500-hour yoga teacher training. So I've done hours and hours of yoga training in the US, in India a few times, in Bali. So I became very interested in yoga, and not just the physical practice, but yoga philosophy as well. So when I was putting together this leadership framework that I was trying to use with my team, I was doing yoga training and very inspired by yoga philosophy. And I was like, how can I bring this into the workplace? Not literally bring yoga into the workplace, but some of the philosophy. Yeah. Some of the mindfulness practices, and some of just the philosophy I wanted to bring in to the workplace. So I did in my leadership, and I do in my books as well. So
I kind of wrote down in my little notes here, I guess you maybe people might sort of find you a bit of a contradiction, that people probably don't associate engineer and yoga as going together. But it sounds to me like you as you were, I guess, an aspiring leader or an early stage leader, I don't know what label you would give it, but when you're sort of having to find your feet in leadership, it seems like you were bringing to the table, right, what have I learned in my yoga world? What have I learned in my engineering world? And you've kind of tried to probably apply a bit of an engineering mindset to what things can I combine to solve the problem. So that kind of combination seems kind of interesting. And then that's what's then, I guess, been sort of infused into your Awake Leadership exercises and things. And so then, is that the point where mind mapping appears in the Hilary sort of narrative? Is it was mind mapping something you were using just for yourself, and then you thought, actually, maybe this can help others? Where does the mind mapping piece start to emerge in that that story?
Yeah, I think I first started mind mapping even in university and college when I was leading teams and working with teams in my entrepreneurship classes and business classes and engineering classes. I was a very avid reader, which is really how I became an author. People are like, how did you write a book after going to engineering school? I hadn't written a paper in like 4 or 5 years. But I was reading a lot. I was like a sponge reading a lot, just about business and about leading teams and all. I was very interested in leadership kind of from the start. And I started reading some design books, like product design books that use like a little bit of mind mapping here and there. So I started researching it more and using it myself. So yeah, mind mapping, I really think comes together at the intersection between the engineering and the yoga. Whereas engineering is very, as some people might understand or might think of it as hard skills or technical skills that I think are important in leadership. Yoga really comes in with the soft skills of leadership. So bringing those two together actually made a really great leadership system. And mind mapping is really kind of a technical skill. I like to call it a leadership technical skill because it's something you literally tangibly do to organize things and figure out ideas. But it's also kind of a soft skill because it's creative and expansive and collaborative, right? A way to collaborate and visually see things. So just like my leadership approach is kind of the intersection of the hard skills and soft skills, I think mind mapping is a great way to really balance the hard and soft skills when you're leading a team.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. I never sort of heard it described like that, but that absolutely resonates, that sort of the hard and the soft. And to me, that maybe, as I think about it, explains why sometimes mind mapping as a thing has sort of struggled to describe itself, because it doesn't quite know. It's almost not hard enough to appeal to the real hard skills people, and it's not necessarily soft enough to appeal to the real soft skills people, and maybe at times has fallen in between sort of two stools. I think particularly with the mind mapping software products over the many years that we've been running Biggerplate, at times it seems like they don't quite know how to describe themselves, and sort of they're not quite sure whether they're trying to appeal to the engineers or the yogis, so that's kind of interesting to think about as maybe a connection between those two things. So you've kind of built mind mapping now into almost all of those books, I think you said, in terms of exercises and things that people do. So, and these are real kind of working books. That's why I really love the ones we got, was you kind of saying to people, here's something to think about, now try and apply it. And I like to read, but I'm a very slow reader. So for me, books that kind of make me pause and do stuff is probably quite helpful. So mind mapping is kind of part of the exercises in the books. And what other kind of exercises are you asking people to go through in maybe some of these books?
Yeah, great question. So mind mapping is a very central part of all three books. And one reason is because I like the books to be action oriented. A lot of times you read something and you think about it, but how do I apply it? The exercises really make the books action oriented. And I think that you really have to start taking action in order to get that self feedback or that feedback to know if what you're doing is working. And a lot of people don't know where to start. But mind mapping is a great exercise for where to start, because I think it actually gets people to start writing down things, right? Start doing something, taking action. What is my role? How would I outline that? How would I change it? How would I prioritize it? But some of the other exercises that get people actually into action are, I have a lot of reflection exercises in the book, like short writing exercises, because another big component of exercises that I usually assign or give leaders in my trainings and in the books is reflection and journaling. Journaling is a big part of my experience as a leader, to be able to give myself a pep talk in the morning, organize my thoughts, talk myself through stuff sometimes, document ideas. So a lot of journaling and reflection prompts in the book as well. There are other things, like other mindfulness exercises that are more like I talk you through it and have you do an exercise yourself in the office and experiment, and then come back to the book and kind of write down how it went and how you would change it. There's like mini brainstorming exercises in some of the books that are pretty cool. And then a lot of like, I walk you through steps of something to get to a conclusion or an idea. So different formats of exercises. Yeah.
I think if I reflect now on this conversation we've been having, your engineering and the yoging and the sort of thing, I think now that I think about your books, they are that really good combination of the creative and the practical. They do make you, they kind of prompt you in ways that are unusual, as well as just giving you information to think about. They're kind of prompting you to kind of stimulate those creative sides that we maybe sometimes allow to lapse because we're so busy doing, and we don't necessarily take that time to pause and reflect. You did a great session for us at our Read Write Map event last year about mind mapping for journaling. And again, it almost doesn't matter whether you're using mind maps or whether you're, scribbling messily in books like this. The pause and reflect is a really big part of kind of what you're advocating as much as anything, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. The pause and reflection, I think not enough people in our world today really do that. I've talked with a lot of classes and a lot of professional groups where they've really picked out that, oh, I need to actually make time to reflect. And I think going through a guidebook that has exercises like that actually prompt you to take a page. And before you go to the next chapter, you need to take the time and reflect. And the prompts help you to actually have something to reflect on or a place to start. Because I think sometimes people, like I mentioned in the Read Write Map event, they open their journal and it's a blank page and they're like, what do I write? Just like start writing what the weather's like or something. But the prompts really help give direction.
That habit doesn't build because you don't. That wasn't very useful. I didn't have anything to write. So a little prompt. We talk about it a lot in terms of mind mapping templates. A simple template can take you a long way by just helping you get off that blank page. So I think that's really exactly. I just want to pick up on something you were mentioning there around you're hearing from clients, customers, people, readers, I guess as well, around the absence of pause and reflect moments. We are currently, where are we? July 2021. We are, nowhere near the end of this very tumultuous period globally in terms of pandemics, but certainly here in the UK, there has been a lot written and said about the impact of extensive working from home, people trying to balance childcare with Zoom calls and all these kind of things, and a lot written certainly here, and I know in the US as well, about sort of the mental burden that this kind of pandemic era has given. What are you kind of seeing in terms of that ability to pause and reflect? Are you kind of seeing people finding they have got a little bit more time to do it maybe, or are you seeing the problem of not doing it has accelerated? Is it now a bigger problem because people are sort of glued to a screen even more so? What's kind of your experience of this very unusual period we've had in terms of that ability for people to pause, reflect, focus on themselves and sort of try to progress, I guess, themselves and their careers?
Yeah. It's an interesting question because I've kind of heard a little bit of both. On one side, I hear people are working from home, they have more time without a commute and things like that. And they have more time to actually reflect at home in a quieter space where they're not in an open office all day, in a chaotic space. They have more time to reflect. And they've also taken up more mindfulness practices like yoga or meditation to actually calm their mind and stress during COVID and get through this challenging period, right? So there's definitely people on that side. The other side of it is that we are on Zoom more, on the computer more, on the screen more, and there are a lot of distractions on the screen. Before COVID, I had published a whole article that was like exercises to do with your team away from the screen, which obviously wasn't possible at all during COVID, but it was a really popular article before COVID because people are like, we love having in-person events and in-person team building because you don't have all the distractions of the screen, the emails popping in, all that kind of stuff, the eye strain, all that. So there are things that come with being at home and remote that are distracting. But I think the people that have found a way to close the computer and the phone at the end of the day and take at least 20 or 30 minutes for exercise, meditation, whatever it is to kind of break up your day and have time away from all the technology, have been able to find some space to clear their mind, recenter, and do a little bit more of, I guess, the self-study reflection work during the pandemic. So that's been a good effect for some people, I think, especially the lack of commute for people that used to, start their day with that. And it was a lot of their time.
Yeah. And I suppose there's a huge area we could talk about a lot, but we probably don't have time, which is this kind of era we're about to go into, this, what looks to be a much more hybrid model. And I think particularly for someone like you who's advising and supporting people in leadership roles, that's going to throw up a lot of new leadership challenges. People have had to adapt leadership to be entirely remote, and now they're going to have to adapt to something that's, again, new for a lot of people. Some people are in the office, some people are remote. What are you where are you seeing the direction of travel for somebody in a leadership role? What are your kind of tips to try and navigate through what's going to become now a pretty finding our way sort of period, probably for a lot of leaders and managers?
Yeah, I've been talking to a lot of leaders, higher level leaders, starting leaders, younger professionals that are individual contributors about kind of what they want going into this time where there's kind of options with the office or with remote or hybrid or whatever it is. So people are definitely starting to navigate that now. And kind of getting a feel for what they want, what other people that they work with want. So it's going to be an interesting time. I think, and they've also mentioned, importantly, that leadership is more important than ever before. A lot of people that I've talked to, one theme has been that people are seeing more turnover. They're very interested in how do I onboard team members in this environment successfully and retain them successfully because they're seeing more turnover. It's hard to onboard team members and keep them engaged and retained just on an online environment. So I think the ability to have at least quarterly or monthly in-person events with everyone together is great. To have people, build relationships, be in person, be able to talk things out in person. So I think that aspect of hybrid, even if people choose to be majority remote, is very important for the onboarding and retention process on teams right now. So I've had a lot of discussions about that. And I think on the leader side as well, getting to know people and their style individually. Like remotely, it's very hard to sometimes check in on someone. Like I had heard someone tell me that they were trying to get to the next step on a project and they just didn't hear from a collaborator, someone on their team for like 4 or 5 days. They just dropped off. You're not in the office. You're not in, what happened to them? I can't move on. So I think as a leader, getting to know people's style, who you need to check in with daily versus every other day versus weekly, how much support they need, which is the second chapter of Awake Leadership, understanding how to support each of your team members, not just supporting your team as a whole, which is important, but also thinking about the individual level. How do I need to support each individual team member who has their own unique needs and ways of working in this new environment?
So there's going to be a lot to navigate, and I also wonder whether the sort of topics that you touch on in the Awake Ethics book are really coming to the fore, because some of those kind of again more sort of ethical questions of how we interact with each other, how we impact each other, are sort of being thrown a little bit for a loop, because how we maybe used to do that isn't going to be possible anymore. So are there aspects to the Awake Ethics kind of book that you're seeing sort of rising in prominence at the minute?
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned the time for reflection and the time for, how do you interact with colleagues in a mindful way. Some of the principles in Awake Ethics, like contentment, like how do you practice contentment rather than just going, overworking. Contentment really relates to that self-reflective piece that then helps, and, time for mindfulness, time for exercise away from work, away from the screen, which prevents burnout and also helps you to show up for other people feeling, energetic and feeling aligned and being able to, practice some emotional control or intelligence. And then the other side of that is having discipline, right? That's like the opposite principle kind of for balancing things out. Like if you're a little too content, like you're not responding to emails for 3 days, how do you set up a framework for yourself that kind of keeps you accountable for doing that? So leaders introducing team members to principles like that and helping team members, not just saying that they should do self-awareness work or, journaling, but actually helping them do that, having a team session or in one-on-ones, having a mentoring session and actually talking through principles or exercises with team members on how they can develop that, self-awareness and what they need to do their best work.
And I suppose for leaders, a big part of that is helping those people they're leading to kind of, create the space, in a space, in a calendar space, physical space. You and I were talking before we started about, if you're in an office environment, finding a quiet space can be a real challenge. So I guess that's a big part of that, is just leaders helping other people to kind of carve out space here and there to sort of implement some of these things that they're learning. So I kind of want to jump to kind of where you're at the moment then, Hilary, because I'm conscious we've talked about a lot, and I think, as you and I always can, we can talk about lots more, but let's talk a little bit about role mapping, which is the focus of a workshop that you're running, a digital, I should say Zoom workshop you're running towards the end of August. Is that a digital version of a workshop you've run before, or is this sort of an evolution of some of your previous work? And what might people expect in a role mapping workshop with you in that regard?
Yeah. In the past, I've been presenting role mapping for a long time. It's one of the most famous, or I guess popular exercises in my first book, Awake Leadership. And role mapping is really a technique based on mind mapping. It is a mind map where you mind map the full scope of your role and gain clarity about the scope of your role, and you're able to prioritize your tasks in your role at any point in time. So a lot of people, even before COVID, right, had trouble really clarifying what is their role in an organization. When you're onboarded onto a team, what are my responsibilities? What are my priorities? You might have a meeting with your leader and they tell you, but having it on one page mapped out, it's as far as your ongoing tasks, your projects, who's on my team, what are my key performance metrics. Those are all things that go into a role map. That's really helpful for someone to know when they're starting a new role. So I always recommend people do that, especially when they start a new job. But even as you're in a job over time, things get changed, right? Someone throws a new project at you, you take on a new responsibility, someone else comes in that you can delegate to. So changing your role map over time to really stay on top of what are my key performance metrics, what are my key responsibilities, what am I working toward, helps with productivity as well as presence and mindfulness at work. So it's a really important exercise that I traditionally taught on paper or whiteboarding. But especially since COVID, online tools like I use MindMeister, as you know, have become even more important for remote collaboration. So can you make your mind map online and open it in your one-on-one meeting with your leader and go through your ongoing tasks, your projects, how each of them are going? And it's a great visual tool to use to really navigate your one-on-one meetings with your leader or your colleagues to show the scope of your work. So I think the way it's evolved over COVID is really the online tool MindMeister becoming even more important for remote collaboration, which is what I'm going to focus on in my workshop on August 31st. And it's also evolved into an important way to write new job descriptions.
Right.
So when I say that, I mean, if you're a leader and your role map is growing, and you're trying to make a case to management about making a new role on your team or hiring someone new, how can you create a new role map where you take some of your tasks and create a role map for what would be someone else on your team to show the value of adding an additional role as well? So both of those applications, I think over COVID have become really important, as well as still doing the written on a paper or a whiteboard role map for yourself, right? If you need to get away from the screen. So both are important, but I'm going to be focusing on the MindMeister, how to build a role map in MindMeister and really use it for different applications at work.
I guess there's a few things that jump out at me that's quite interesting to think about. The first is, as you say, is you might start with one role map, but most people I speak to who work for other people, they find things are being added to their theoretical role map all the time, whether they want it to happen or not. So that role map grows and grows and grows. So I guess there's a value, in the visual, as you say, can it fit on one page anymore? No, it can't. That maybe is telling us something. Maybe Hilary's role is getting a bit out of control. We're asking her to do 1.5 people's roles instead of one, or maybe Hilary should be asking for the pay for 1.5 people's roles. So I guess it can have very tangible results in saying, this person's overloaded, or we're spreading this person over too many things that are too separated, or these kind of things. And then I suppose the other thing that occurred to me is, I think it should also serve people really well to be able to say a little bit more clearly, that thing you've just thrown over to me, I don't see that anywhere on my roadmap. So maybe you could just help me understand. And maybe just helping that dialogue a little bit with people to say, does that really belong to me? Because if so, we need to build on this role map, and that means we need to have another conversation. So do you kind of see people using it, or would you advocate people using it a little bit for that kind of give and take and push and pull to kind of say what is and is not sort of within the scope of my role?
Yeah, totally. I think going back to the writing job descriptions, I think that a lot of people are not retained for a long time, sometimes because their responsibilities aren't clear and they're asked to do things outside of what they thought was their job. right? So having this clear at the beginning, or at least the first month, molding their role map to make it really clear what they're responsible for, actually helps to retain people longer and keeps them engaged and feeling clear about what their responsibilities are and what their ownership really is in their job. And then also, like you mentioned, I think once it's a great visual communication tool, because a lot of people, managers or leaders that are overworked and feel like their plate is overflowing, when a colleague asks them to take something else on to their plate, it's hard for them to communicate, oh, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I'm prioritizing this. And it kind of sounds like whining or complaining sometimes. But if you can pull up your role map, it's like a picture says 1,000 words, right? It's like, this is all I'm working on. So either their leader could help them rearrange their role map, right? Seeing in really what's in their mind, what they're working on, right? Saying, oh, we need to rearrange this, or it quickly communicates to a colleague or upper management that you really don't have space, or you need help reprioritizing, instead of having to go through a whole conversation and maybe sound like you're complaining or venting a little bit, right? It's a very clear, practical way of just showing that.
Show me where that thing fits in this picture.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think the interesting point you make around you use MindMeister, and you're seeing sort of a almost more utility in that as we've moved into this era we're in, and it doesn't seem like that's going to go backwards. I suppose that the benefit of sort of, yes, there is definite benefit to the pen and paper exercise in terms of that self-reflection. Not always so easy to use that as a communicating tool with others. If, like me, for example, you have terrible handwriting. I guess with MindMeister, you have something that's just going to tidy things up and make it a little bit easier to communicate with others, but also you then have something that can kind of live and breathe as a document and evolve, and you're kind of taking care of version control and things like that very easily, which I guess in a business context, or not necessarily business, an organizational context, makes it the utility much better. You're going to be able to use that role map and sort of, as you say, maybe even take chunks of that role map and put it into a new one, because you've got to define a new job description. So I guess the enforced change that you've sort of had to adopt of using the digital tools more, maybe we're opening up more opportunities for that application to kind of expand and be more sort of useful on an ongoing basis, and probably easier for people to engage with on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, totally. I remember when you introduced me to MindMeister like 3 or 4 years ago, I was like, I really need a better tool. I was using like PowerPoint, Excel, 2017 or so. I think it was 2017. Yeah, something like that.
And look how far you've come, Hilary.
Yeah. And you're like, oh, this is like Google Docs for mind mapping. And I'm like, this is exactly what I need. And I think it's helped a lot of teams that I've worked with, as far as like on a consulting basis, that do need to transition roles. Like, let's say someone's leaving your team. If they just have a mind map written down, you don't know when that was written down, you don't really know how to transfer it to the next person, right? Because let's say the handwriting's not great. So if it's kept in MindMeister in an online tool, you can always share that, and you can see when was it created, when was it updated, and you have it in an online version to transfer to the next person taking on that role, so they can really see where the last person left off as far as their responsibilities, if you have someone new coming in for that role, and the leader can then work with that person on updating it, of course. But I think it's really useful for transitions, for role transitions within a company,
which, as you say, that there is growing indications that turnover is a bigger issue over the last year, and may continue to be. So effective transitions may be needed more often, actually, over the next couple of years. It seems like a lot of people are evaluating what they're doing and changing. So good tools for exit processes and onboarding processes are perhaps going to be sort of even more important. So let me just come back and just ask you around the role mapping workshop, particularly that you're doing. Who's it for? Am I coming there to understand my own role, or am I coming there to learn the role mapping technique so I can then do that with my team members? Who's your kind of sort of ideal, if I can put it that way, attendee for the workshop?
Yeah, so it's really professionals of all kinds. I would say leaders of teams or leaders of projects, as well as individual contributors that are looking to be more organized and productive in their own role. So you're really going to learn the role mapping technique and how to create a role map in MindMeister. So whether that's your own role, like you're an individual contributor, or you're a leader trying to clarify your own role, you can do it that way. But you're really going to learn the technique and how to use it either for yourself or for training your team in how to make more effective role maps for themselves so that you can see what they're working on, they can see what you're working on. So it's mostly going to be focused on creating a role map in MindMeister and then using it for a few different applications like tracking and measuring your progress, writing better job descriptions, collaborating remotely with a role map in a meeting. So it's going to be an action-packed hour where we're going to go through creating a role map really in the first third of the hour, and then the rest will be focused on applications, and I'll also be open for questions as well.
Perfect. Yeah. So people can find more about the workshop at awakeleadershipsolutions.com and sort of, I'm sure, fire you any questions they may have about that. Yeah. So that's 31st of August. So I think hopefully people can go and have a look at that and getting involved from wherever they are in the world. So then just a bit of a forward look for you, Hilary. Awake Leadership, you know, you've been producing the books, you've been running workshops, you've been doing consulting, you've transitioned through this COVID period to more remote delivery of those kind of same things. But if you were looking at the next kind of 12 to 18 months into 2022, what's the kind of the future focus for you, and kind of where do you see your own sort of work heading?
Yeah, great question. So as I'm coming into the rest of 2021, definitely getting out there with more events. I'm trying to do partnerships with different professional organizations that need guidance and help with leadership. So I have a couple seminars and workshops in the works with some professional organizations for their members. I'm also going to be doing some more private events with universities and schools, as well as companies and professional organizations, but really, companies for their employees. So yeah, trying to get more events, whether that's virtual or in person, whatever people are, currently entertaining at their organization. I know virtual can sometimes, gain more attendance right now than in person, but I'm hoping that when people are ready to go back in person, we can do some in-person events. But of course, I'm always trying to get the books out there. So we have the print books as well as the Kindle books. But I think one reason I started this business with a book is that it's something tangible you can hold in your hand. I've been talking to a lot of people how, especially I work with a lot of people in tech and things that are mostly computer based. And they're always looking for something tangible that you can actually hold, not reading something on the screen, but something you can actually read and hold in your hand and work through with a pen and a paper. So the books are always one of the favorite aspects of my business because anyone can work through it at their own pace. And it's something tangible that you can hold. So yeah, really trying to get the word out more about my books to new readers and new audiences who are really realizing that leadership is really important right now more than ever before.
Yeah, and I think, as I said near the beginning, I think the recognition that it's not going to happen by itself. You don't just suddenly become a leader because you're in a more senior role. You really do have to kind of figure it out and learn. And I think practical tools and techniques and things like your books are very, as I say, they're a great kind of combination of sort of thinking, getting creative, and then getting really practical and trying to sort of apply things. So yeah, I'm excited to kind of see where that takes you. So I guess, Hilary, as a sort of final wrap up, I guess, so we don't go on too long as we can. I guess thank you for all of your support and your help as a Biggerplate partner. Thanks for the great books and all the mind maps and the webinars you've been sharing with our members. I know they've already proven very popular, so I'm sure you'll be seeing some more visits from our members over time. For anybody who wants to go and find out more information, the core destination, I think, is awakeleadershipsolutions.com, isn't it? Is there any other sort of places we want to flag for people to come and kind of learn about what you're doing?
That's really the central location with all the links to my books, the links to my social media, LinkedIn page. Feel free to reach out there, my email. So yeah, awakeleadershipsolutions.com is a great place to start.
Perfect. Yeah. So we hopefully will see a few people joining your role mapping workshop on the 31st of August, and subsequent workshops I'm sure are going to come down the line as later in the year, more of those kind of public access workshops, do you think?
Yeah, I'm hoping to at least have one per quarter. We'll see if this one goes well. I may even have one a month. And a lot of them will focus on my different applications for mind mapping, as well as some of those other skills and approaches to leadership and more seminar type of workshops like I talked about. But right now I'm really in exploratory mode on the public events. I do have 5 different topics for private events that I give that I really expand on things in a little bit longer time frame. But yeah, I'm looking forward to offering more public events. We'll see how the role mapping workshop goes, and then we'll go from there. So I hope to see people a lot more.
I'm sure you will. Well,
Yeah.
Hilary, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me today. It's been great, as always, to hear from you and hear what you're working on and getting your perspectives. I feel there's a lot of other things I've scribbled on my notes that I'll just talk to you privately about that and get some advice. How to be a
Awesome.
better
Yeah.
leader, how to do the things better, how to communicate, all of this stuff.
Thanks, Liam. Yeah,
But
it was
Hilary,
fun.
thank you very much. We'll catch you there.
Thank
Thanks, everyone,
you.
for watching. Take a look at awakeleadershipsolutions.com and see what books and guidance and advice you can grab from Hilary as soon as you can.
Thank you.